two steel legs, built miles apart on the ground and raised toward each other into open sky, with a rule that they had to meet at the top or the whole thing was scrap, no more than 1/64th of an inch out of line. That was the impossible bet at the heart of the Gateway Arch. On the west bank of the Mississippi in St. Louis, it curves 630 feet up with no columns and no cables under it, and to this day nobody has built a taller arch anywhere on Earth. The riverfront underneath it was a slum they bulldozed. The cranes that raised it had to crawl up its own sides because nothing on the ground could reach, and the men doing the welding worked where the actuaries had already counted the bodies. 13 deaths, they figured, before it was finished. I pulled the winning contest drawings, the engineering plans, and the old construction photos, and used advanced AI to piece together how it actually went up, section by section. From the first drawings to the fire hoses and hydraulic jacks of the morning, and they finally closed the gap. The arch began not as a monument, but as a rescue plan for a dying riverfront. By the 1930s, the old cast-iron warehouse district along the St. Louis Levee, once the beating heart of the city's river trade, had decayed into a rundown stretch of aging blocks. A local civic leader named Luther Ely Smith looked at it and saw an opportunity. Clear the whole district and raise a grand memorial to the pioneers who had pushed west through St. Louis, the self-proclaimed gateway to the West. The memorial was tied to Thomas Jefferson, whose Louisiana Purchase had opened that frontier, and in 1935 the federal government formally established it as the Jefferson National Expansion Memorial. Voters approved a bond issue to help pay for it, and crews demolished roughly 40 blocks of old buildings and rail yards along the water, sparing the old St. Louis courthouse where the Dred Scott slavery case had been argued a century earlier. What came down with those 40 blocks was one of the country's largest surviving collections of cast-iron front architecture, commission houses and warehouses dating back before the Civil War, cleared decades before anyone thought to landmark them. The demolition also emptied out the small businesses and the last residents still living along the old levee. By the time construction began, almost nothing remained to show what had stood there. Then, for more than a decade, the cleared ground sat nearly empty as the Great Depression and the Second World War swallowed the country's money and attention. Only in 1947 did the Commission finally launch a nationwide design competition, offering a $40,000 prize and drawing 172 entries from architects across the country, narrowed down to 5 finalists. The winner, selected the following year, was a breathtaking stainless steel arch submitted by a young Finnish-American architect named Eero Saarinen. The telegram announcing the win was addressed simply to E. Saarinen, and the family first raised a toast to his father, Eliel, a celebrated architect who had also entered the competition, before they discovered it was the son, not the father, who had won. It was Eero's first major independent commission, and it would come to define his entire career. What Saarinen drew was deceptively simple, and the thing I find elegant about it is that he did not really invent the shape at all. He borrowed it from gravity itself. Hang a chain loosely between 2 points, and it settles into a natural curve that mathematicians call a catenary. Turn that curve upside down, and it becomes the strongest possible arch, one that channels its own enormous weight cleanly down through itself and into the ground, with almost no sideways strain. Saarinen refined it into a weighted catenary, thicker and heavier at the base and tapering toward the top, and made a striking choice. The arch would be exactly as tall as it is wide, 630 feet in both directions, standing 75 feet taller than the Washington Monument, and making it the tallest arch in the world. The precise mathematical equation of that curve is even engraved inside the finished arch. The structural engineering fell to Hans Carl Bandel. Each leg would be a hollow equilateral triangle, a shape chosen because 3 sides are naturally rigid, shrinking from a massive 54 feet on a side at the base to just 17 feet near the summit. The walls were built like a sandwich. The outer skin was gleaming stainless steel, roughly 886 tons of it, making the arch the largest stainless steel monument on Earth. Up close, the surface is not a mirror, but a faintly brushed finish, which is why the arch seems to shift color with the sky. Cool silver at midday and glowing gold at sunset. Beneath it sat an inner skin of structural carbon steel, and in the lower 300 feet, the space between the two skins was packed solid with concrete and cinched tight with hundreds of steel tension bars, turning the bottom of each leg into a single rigid mass. There is no hidden internal skeleton. The polished steel skin itself is the structure, carrying every ounce of the monument's roughly 17,000 tons, an approach engineers call a stressed skin. The whole arch was engineered to flex rather than fight the weather, built to sway as much as 18 inches at the very top in the fiercest winds without harm. And Saarinen never saw any of it rise. He died of a brain tumor in 1961, at only 51, about a year and a half before the first steel section was set in place. Turning that curve into steel demanded years of groundwork. Ground was first broken in 1959, but the serious foundation work only began in the early 1960s, when crews dug down and poured massive concrete footings that reach about 60 feet into the riverbank, partly into solid bedrock. Each finished leg would weigh thousands of tons and push constantly outward, and only anchors this deep and this heavy could stop the arch from slowly spreading its own feet apart over the decades. The margin for error down here was frightening. Each footing had to be set in exactly the right spot and angle, because every one of the 142 sections stacked above would inherit that starting point. On February 12, 1963, workers lowered the first triangular stainless steel section onto the south foundation, and after decades of talk, the arch finally began to rise. The design broke the structure into prefabricated sections, each a 12-foot triangular band of steel. The lowest sections were so enormous, over 50 feet across, that they had to be assembled and welded together on site. The smaller upper sections were fabricated in the factory and shipped in by rail, then stacked one on top of the next to form the two curving legs. The general contractor was the McDonald Construction Company of St. Louis, while the steel was fabricated and erected by the Pittsburgh Des Moines Steel Company. It stalled repeatedly over funding disputes and safety reviews, and civil rights activists brought the site to a standstill with protests against the exclusion of black workers from the project. Still, section by welded section, the two legs lifted off the ground and began their long, deliberate lean toward one another. For the first 72 feet, ordinary cranes could still reach up and lower each section into place. Beyond that height, the arch simply beat them. The legs were curving inward and climbing far past the reach of anything rooted to the earth, so the engineers built something remarkable to solve it. Two 100-ton creeper derricks that rode up a pair of steel tracks bolted directly onto the outer face of each leg.
The detail I can't get over is that the cranes climbed the very structure they were assembling, hauling themselves higher up each leg as it rose,
like a machine building its own ladder as it went. Each derrick gripped the arch with adjustable steel arms that reshaped to hug the constantly changing curve. It would haul a fresh section, weighing around 50 tons near the top, up into the air, swing it into position at the growing tip of the leg, and hold it dead steady while crews welded and bolted it fast. Deep inside the hollow legs, other workers welded the inner carbon steel skin and fitted the framework for a future tram. In the lower legs, each section was then pumped full of concrete and locked with tension bars, while higher up the double steel walls carried the load alone. Then the derrick would creep higher on its tracks and start the cycle again. What looked impossible from the street resolved into a slow, patient rhythm playing out against the sky. Lift, set, weld, fill, and climb, one triangular section at a time. Up high, each section took only about 30 minutes to position. But between every single one, surveyors stopped the work to recheck the alignment, because the whole structure lived or died on precision. As the legs curved further over, the derricks had to set each section at steeper, more awkward angles, with crews welding from tracks that leaned out high over the ground. As the two legs climbed higher and leaned further inward, they grew dangerously top-heavy, each one a curving steel tower reaching out into open air with nothing on the far side to brace it. Left unbraced, they could bow toward each other or sway in the wind. So at about 530 feet, workers used the two derricks to hoist a stabilizing strut, a 225-foot alloy steel truss weighing some 60 tons, and lock it horizontally between the legs, holding them apart and steady as they neared the top. The danger up there never let up, and every man on the crew understood it. Safety experts had grimly calculated that as many as 13 workers might die building something this tall and this untested. And men spent their days welding these sections together while balanced far above the ground on narrow open platforms, wind pulling at the unfinished, unconnected legs beneath their feet. And yet across the entire 3-year construction of the arch, not one worker lost his life. For a structure this high, built with the equipment of the 1960s, that safety record is close to miraculous, and it remains one of the least known facts about the entire build. The strut would hold the two legs true until the very last piece went in, and only then would it come out. Everything now came down to the final piece, because any small error at the base would be magnified into feet at the summit. The two separate legs had to grow toward each other on a tolerance of just 1/64th of an inch, thinner than a couple of stacked coins. To hit that, surveyors took their most critical measurements before dawn, when the sun could not yet heat one leg and expand the steel enough to bend the whole alignment out of true. By October 28, 1965, only the last section remained, an 8-foot triangular keystone meant to drop neatly into the narrow gap at the very top. But that morning the sun had already warmed the south leg and swelled it, squeezing the opening far too tight for the piece to fit. So the St. Louis Fire Department ran hoses up the leg and sprayed it with cold water to cool and shrink the steel, while a powerful hydraulic jack shoved the two legs apart just enough to open the gap. The whole operation stretched across the morning as thousands of spectators packed the riverfront below. At last, with the gap forced open and the steel cooled, the keystone was slowly lowered into place. A cheer went up from the crowd below, and the two halves that had risen on their own for almost 3 years finally became one. Welded inside that final section was a time capsule holding the signatures of hundreds of thousands of St. Louis residents. With the arch closed, the creeper derricks stripped away the stabilizing strut and their own climbing tracks, then were taken apart and lowered back down the legs they had built. The first dedication ceremony was rained out, and the memorial was not formally dedicated until 1968, when Vice President Hubert Humphrey spoke at its base. Finishing the steel left one problem nobody had fully cracked: how to carry visitors up the inside of a hollow, curving leg to the top. A normal elevator only travels straight, but the arch bends the entire way up. The solution came from an elevator man named Dick Bowser, who reportedly sketched out the concept in about 2 weeks. His machine was part elevator and part Ferris wheel. Inside each leg runs a chain of 8 barrel-shaped capsules, each seating 5 passengers, that climbs the curve while slowly rotating to keep riders level the whole way up. 2 of these trams were built, one for each leg, carrying up to 40 people at a time on a ride of about 4 minutes. It was an unorthodox machine, but it worked, and it has run smoothly ever since. Each leg also hides more than 1,000 emergency steps spiraling up inside. The observation deck at the summit sits 630 feet above the riverfront, its narrow windows looking out over downtown St. Louis on one side and Illinois on the other. A cramped space that holds only about 160 visitors at a time. Below the arch, engineers hollowed out an underground museum of westward expansion built into the foundations. The north tram opened to the public in 1967, the south a year later, and the crowds arrived almost immediately. The arch that some critics had once mocked as a giant, pointless hoop of steel became the defining symbol of the city, drawing millions of people a year and helping breathe life back into the neglected riverfront that had started the idea 3 decades earlier. The finished monument had cost around $13 million, a bargain for a structure that has needed almost no repair to its graceful shape in the years since. In a little under 3 years, The Gateway Arch rose from hollow concrete footings into the tallest monument in the country, lifted by cranes that scaled its own sides and closed by a fire hose and a jack one October morning. It went up without costing a single life, built on a shape so efficient that it needs no supports at all, holding itself up on nothing but the perfect curve of a hanging chain flipped upside down. The architect who dreamed it never lived to ride to the top, but his silver arch has stood over the Mississippi ever since, still the boldest thing on the St. Louis skyline. If this was your kind of deep dive, hit subscribe for more stories of how the structures we recognize today were actually built. What building, bridge, or monument should I cover next? Drop it in the comments, and I will see you in the next video.